welcome to Gaming. This week, the question we're asking is, what makes Hades so good? I'm John Robertson. I'm joined, as usual, by Stace Harmon. So Hades has been out a couple of years on early access, but it's just recently come out as a full-fledged game. It's by Super Giant Games, who did Bastion and Transistor and Pyre. And it seems like everyone in the world pretty much is talking about Hades, playing Hades, streaming Hades, podcasting about Hades. So, it must be pretty good. Stace, you and I have both played a lot of it. So what's the answer then? What makes Hades so good?
Well, firstly, I want to say that I'm very excited that we're talking about this because I've been playing Hades. I think Hades has been the only thing that I've been playing for the last couple of weeks since picking it up on Switch. So I'm very pleased to be talking about Hades because it is incredible. Trying to distill the essence of it into an answer to a question like that, I think a couple of key things for me are that it respects the player's time an awful lot, and it keeps on giving you stuff not just to do but also to dig into and to uncover, and it's just an incredibly rewarding game. It's a game, I think it's a game that I've so far done 75 plus hours of it according to my Switch profile, and I imagine I will do probably 75 more before I'm anywhere near done with it. So yeah, it's something that is giving me an incredible amount of joy and that compulsive feel to just one more run. So yeah, I think it's how much it gives is a big part of why it's so good. It's how well put together it is, how much thought has gone into it, and how much it gives to the player. I think is a big part of it.
Yeah, you've played more than me. I've played maybe 25 hours. I'm not sure. I think it does tell me, doesn't it?
It gives you a ballpark.
25 hours.
Switch, yeah.
Yeah. The platform's an interesting one. So you've played it more than me collectively. I've played it maybe 25-ish hours on Switch and maybe 5 hours on PC. And like, for the record, I don't really like roguelikes, really. Like, I've never really kind of got into them. I mean, Rogue Legacy is the one that I've played the most. Spelunky never really did it for me. Dead Cells never really did it for me. And I respect these games. Like, I'm not saying they're bad games whatsoever, but that lack of progress, the kind of the I don't know, like death in those games felt like a really hard pill to swallow. Whereas it doesn't in Hades, which I think is one of its sort of core selling points, really. And there's a number of things that play into that. There's a progression, which we can talk about. There's a narrative, which we can talk about. But I think I was thinking about this just before recording, and I think one of the main reasons why death doesn't really feel like a chore, or more pertinently, I suppose, why the beginning of each run doesn't feel like a chore, is that the combat, just at its core, is just so good. And I think it's the speed of combat, which is so important when you first start that run. Like, when you first start that run playing as Zagreus, it feels like you're already leveled up, like, even though you're not. Like, you're starting at a level where in other games, it's like that's going to take you many hours to get to that point. But here, you start really good, and then you just get better. Like, so it's always those opening rooms are really exciting then. Whereas in other Binding of Isaac, I guess, comes to mind, like, it can just all be a bit pedestrian at the start, and it's like, oh, you're just getting through this now, and in order to get to the good bit, like, later. But that doesn't happen here.
How do you? Yeah, and a part of that is, I think there's the weapons play into that a lot, which I wonder, do you do run after run using the same weapon in order to perfect it, or to tweak on what you just did coming off the back of a previous run? Or, like, what is your weapon selection process? How do you choose what you're going to go with next?
So only recently have I realised, I think you pointed out, that the glowing purple things around the weapons when you're on the weapon selection room, that means you get a bonus to that resource. What's that resource
Darkness.
called? The crystals, darkness. I only recently, in the last, well, I say recently, like 5 hours of playing time ago, or whatever, 10 hours playing time ago, I only really realised that was a thing. So I've been doing that more in order to build up my resources. But prior to that, I was heavily in the shield. I did probably 15 hours in a row on the shield.
Wow. Okay.
The shield I find is the most sort of me weapon, really. I like the way it levels up. I like that, you can do, it's Captain America basically. You can, you throw it around and it bounces off stuff and it hits enemies, and you can also use it to defend. It makes the first boss super easy. Super easy with the shield.
Yeah, and this is perhaps starting to get into the meat of it as well, is that bonus to the darkness resource that you get through picking certain weapons also ties into some of the the power-ups that you take via the mirror, because there is one that for a long time I was taking a specific one that every time you exited a chamber you got back a small amount of HP, and that was like 3 HP is that maxes out at. But the flip side of that boon, if you do the other, I think it's the yellow or the green aspect of that boon rather than the purple, is one that you restore health based on a percentage of the darkness that you pick up. So if you are then getting a boost to your darkness, then that means in turn that you're going to heal more each time you pick darkness up. So the way that lots of little pieces tie together, and I think that again perhaps feeds into this notion that you've just been talking about, where you feel leveled up to begin with, because as with many roguelikes, you do have that persistent power creep of just getting persistently better in terms of not just as a player, but your character as well has access to better weapons, more upgrades on each subsequent run, and that ties into, like, there are many different loadout decisions that you can take before. There's like a sort of a mini game in how do I want to play this time? I'm going to take this weapon, and perhaps my decision in which weapon to take is going to be based on that bonus to darkness. But then I'm going to go back to the mirror, and how does what powers I'm taking here through the mirror feed into the weapon that I'm using? And then it goes beyond that as well when you start unlocking aspects for the weapons, because that then feeds into different power-ups as well. So there's this gradual layering of new information and new ways to play that turn what is already a deep game, even from the outset, into an increasingly deeper and more complex and rewarding game as you progress. So you don't just master it, get bored, and then walk away. There's always something new, or for a long time there's something new being introduced. Yeah,
and I think actually that's one of the things that surprised me about it. Is, I guess, the game can be quite personal in that way. Like you can play it with those different layering of boons and power ups and upgrade and whatever weapon choice, and then your subsequent choices, trinkets and whatever. You can really play it quite differently to how other people approach it, which isn't something like, again, in roguelikes, it's not really a privilege that you're given a lot of the time. You often just start out the run essentially naked, just like everyone else, and that's it. You go and you kind of gain differentiation from other players through the randomness of the drops that you get. And that does happen here, of course, but your starting level could be so different. Your starting state could be so different to other players that even if you randomly, by pure incredible coincidence, got the same drops as someone else, your approach to it could be very different to that person.
Yeah, and that absolutely, that plays a lot into the preference, and it also plays a lot into I think the psychological feeling of I'm having a real problem with this type of enemy or this type of boss, and then taking a particular loadout that fits that or that works particularly well. Maybe that's something as simple as it being melee or ranged, depending on what the boss is or what the enemy is that's problematic, and that you do get to make those decisions. And yeah, like you say, there is an element of RNG to it, but the fact that you are given 3 boons every time you get offered a choice, you get a choice of 3 of them, and that you get to the point where you have the codex that you can then check to see what boons are available from each god, and certain ones are dependent on having other boons. So it's like, well, these are the 3 choices I have right now. I ultimately want to get to this place further down the line. So I need to take this one in order to then get offered another one later on. And it's that again, that just, there's no, like, there isn't any, it doesn't feel like there are any throwaway choices. There's no, well, I got unlucky because I got this power up instead of this one, which can happen elsewhere. But I mean, Binding of Isaac is a game that I love. I've played, again, dozens, if not hundreds of hours of that. And part of the appeal of that is, what am I going to get next? What am I, am I going to get the spider power up, or am I going to get the wavy tears or whatever? And part of the excitement and the appeal of it is that, but you're not, this feels slightly more nuanced because you have a say in it. And so it kind of hooks you in on that thing as well of you're always responsible and you're always complicit in the fate of your run because you had the choices along the way. You weren't just given a hand and you had to make the best of it. You've picked some of those cards yourself. So that's, I mean, it is, it's empowering, I guess, in that way. It's not being done to you. You have a great deal of choice in the matter. Yeah,
and I think that's an important point because I think unlike roguelikes are quite a hardcore genre, right? Like they're for hardcore gamers. Like there's not really a genre you're really going to recommend to people who you don't know already. They're into games, to play a lot of games. But I feel with Hades, while it is a hardcore game, still, of course, it is. It's fast and it's got a lot of numbers and leveling up and all that stuff. So it's inherently kind of hardcore, but. You see people on YouTube and stuff doing like no-hit challenges and speed runs and whatever, and it's just all insane. So there's got that hardcore appeal. But I think also for players who are kind of one or two rungs down from that, they wouldn't necessarily consider themselves hardcore players. They don't play every game that comes out. They're not looking for games to specifically challenge them in a, I will now dominate this game through my skill kind of reward type. I think it's got appeal there as well because of a lot of that stuff. There is the constant sense of progression. There's there's a story elements. There's it just looks incredible as well. Like I've got it on Switch and on PC. It says a lot given I just don't really like roguelikes very much. But I think because it can appeal to the hardcore and the less, and they're not I'm not going to call them casual players, not casual, just less hardcore players. I think from that perspective, like it's a real kind of leap forwards in the genre, really. Like it's taken a genre away from just being only for the super hardcore into a more kind of diverse space. But it's done it without dumbing down any of the systems. It's actually done it by enhancing the systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that enhanced. That's exactly where my thoughts were leading me as you were talking about that there is a building upon rather than a here's the bar and you're going to constantly fall short of it. It's like here's the bar much lower and you can hit this bar. You can play this game reasonably well, with not a tremendous amount of natural or inherent skill, or you don't need super fast twitch reflexes to play this game well. They're going to help. They're going to help you perform better for sure. They're going to help you get those 8-minute speed runs and that kind of stuff. But there is a much lower barrier to entry to this game. But then it ramps up, and I don't know if you'll be there 25 hours in. Have you got any of the Pact of Punishment stuff yet?
No, so I haven't. So I've gotten to. So I haven't been past Elysium yet.
Right.
But I've fought the boss a couple, the dual boss, spoilers, a couple of times.
A bit of a bitch, those ones, yeah.
Yeah, although I've gotten closer with. I'm not far away from beating those. Their health bars were really low both times that I tried it. Like I got destroyed on the Meg. I can't remember her full name. The Furies, whatever the girls are called, Megara, and the Stone,
the Hydra.
Yeah. Those two kicked my ass a lot more when I first started. When the first couple of times I saw them, but then I guess maybe it's because by the time I got into them, I'm much more versed in the game, what it's doing, what all the boons are doing, all that stuff. So I got more experience when I first approached that boss than I did the other two.
Well, so the once you've been through the game a couple of times, and this is yet another thing, this notion of like, it takes you a lot of hours, or it took me at least a lot of hours to finish it once. And you do that once, and there is a genuine, real sense of accomplishment in that, because that's taken many, many hours to do that again, or for me at least, it took many, many hours to get to that point. And then it's one of those games that the more you play it, the more you realise that you're just scratching the surface. And so that first completion feels like an accomplishment, as it should. You get rewarded for that, and that then opens up a bunch more stuff that allows you to, it gives you more choices. I think it adds depth without necessarily adding complexity. And I think that's a very fine line to walk. It's very easy just to add a bunch of features and sliders and I want to tweak this particular aspect of this and not this one. And all you're doing really is adding complexity. But this adds depth. You understand the choices you're making. The Pact of Punishment stuff is basically, in a nutshell, it's a way of making the game harder and ramping up certain rewards, but you're making it harder through entirely your own choices. It's not just, now all of the enemies hit harder and you take more damage, like the sort of the very basic video game sort of difficulty levels often are. This is a very specific thing. You can have enemies that have more health, you can have enemies that have different attack patterns, and there's like just a whole bunch of different things that you can pick to add difficulty to this and to ramp up your rewards. And again, it's your choice. It's like, well, and that plays into what weapon you're using, because perhaps, you know, if you're using a particular weapon that hits frequently and often, like the gun weapon, whose name escapes me, Adamant Rail.
I've never used that.
That's like, there is a particular pact that the first hit on every enemy doesn't do anything to them. And if you've got a very slow moving, like maybe the bow, that's a much bigger deal than if you've got a weapon that's spitting out bullets and you can hit them once and knock that shield away. So it's just all of these decisions that you're being empowered to make and playing it your way, and not being made to feel like, just not being punished in the conventional sense of, well, this is hard, suck it up and get good. You know, it isn't that at all. You always feel like you're good. You can tweak how much of a challenge you want.
Yeah, and I like that, because that kind of plays into one of the other things that I like about it is you don't know how you're going to approach each run, right? So you might set up your stuff and you know what weapon, you know what trinket and everything, but really you don't know how you're going to play. Like, and there's no way of really knowing, because you don't know what you're going to get. So you have to stay. So even though, unlike other roguelikes, you can kind of set up that base, that foundation to play with, you have to stay malleable. You have to stay open-minded. So you can't just be relying on those same 5 moves all the time. Like, while I like the shield a lot, you can't just rely on now I'm just going to block and force and do the dash, the burst attack thing that you can do with it. The bow is an interesting one, because when I played with the bow, the first time I played with the bow was the first time that I beat the Hydra. And when I started playing with the bow, the first few rooms, I was like, I really don't like this. Like, this is, it takes away the movement of the game. It takes away this. But I think I really like the Dionysus stuff a lot. And I think I got the ability for when you dash, you leave like the circle of drunkenness. Hangover. Yeah. It causes bestows enemies with hangover, and then the bow plus that I found a really sort of deadly combination with how I play, because I can shoot people from afar, and then as they come close I can dash away or dash through them and make them all drunk. So even though I'm killing enemies quite slowly with the bow, their health is low by the time I come to shoot them. So I found, and that's not really a combo that I had in mind before starting that run, or even knew was possible, really.
Yeah. Well, it's funny actually that I've not said this to you previously, but Dionysus reminds me. He kind of reminds me of like a godlike version of your D&D character. That's how I think of him. He's this very charming, easygoing guy.
He is my favourite character in the game.
I'm not surprised by that at all. I think Artemis is probably mine. She's a bit more sour, which probably is fitting. So I think it's possibly clear that although I have played more of it than you have, we are both quite early on in where you can be in Hades. I mean, again, and some of that is because it's a game that keeps on giving, because it keeps rewarding you. I am 75 hours in, and I'm not at what would be considered perhaps the end game. And that's a very interesting thing for me, because the end game, I'm not yet at the point where I'm just doing runs over and over and over again for the sake of it, effectively, where my entire interaction with the game is the next run. I haven't exhausted all the narrative by any means whatsoever. And it's interesting to me because a lot of previous roguelikes that I've played, I feel like often they start much closer to that point of where you get a bit of narrative, you get a bit of reward, and then they get to a point where you are kind of just churning runs to get better at it as a player, to get past that next area. Hades, 75 hours in, I'm not at that point yet. I'm still getting, and that helps a lot take the sting out of when things don't go so well. And there's that, and often for me, it's very much that's me, what an idiot. Like, I wasn't aggressive enough. I was relying too much on my area of effect attacks to fight the last boss or whatever it might be. And really, I needed to get in there more. And there's a sting in that, which is very, very quickly neutered and taken away by arriving back at the House of Hades and then finding out what new narrative interactions there are to have and who's got what else to say. And again, dozens of hours into the game, I'm still opening up these little side arcs of story that it just makes me smile every time, because it's like conversations with Dusa, the Gorgon housekeeper, and it's like there's just all these things that are it just keeps on giving, which is quite a feat, I think.
I mean, the narrative is I think it makes, like, playing as Zagreus, like, it really feels like he has relationships with these people, and they have relationships with each other before you showed up, as a player, before you showed up. Which
it's
does
almost
help
like these characters existed in a larger fiction, right? Before they were put into this game.
Well, on that as well, like, so Zagreus is a god of rebirth in Greek myth, so obviously it's a perfect fit. But I also like the gods are how they are in Greek myth, in that they're imperfect and often incredibly childish as well, petty. Like they get annoyed at petty things, and then they'll have these outbursts of rage, and then the next second they'll be totally fine again. Yeah. I really like that element. Like, it gives it a more, even though it's gods and it's Hades and it's Olympus and Olympians. They feel like people. Like, they don't feel like these like lofty, untouchable, godlike, I suppose, presences. Like, their powers and their stuff they are, but in their personalities, they're kind of relatable. Like, they're imperfect, they're flawed characters.
Yeah, and I think you see that definitely in the interactions with Zagreus and them, but also in their interactions with each other. When you have the god trials, where you have two different gods, and you have to pick one, and then the other. Well,
that's what I was meaning. Yeah. Like, okay, I'm angry, and now suddenly, actually, you were quite good there. So
and they'll reference that, won't they? And depending on who it is you've spurned, if it's Ares, he'll talk about the fact that you've just performed really well against those things that I threw at you in a rage, so we're cool now. Or somebody like Dionysus, who's like, oh look, I can't stay mad at you. What were we even fighting about again? And it's just it all goes away. It's like it's very, very well realized. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we've covered there. Is there anything in particular, or what is your favorite aspect, or is there anything in particular that you that stands out for you above and beyond just kind of the entire package woven together? Is there a particular strand that you find really rewarding?
I think. I mean, it's not really answering the question, but I think, like I've said, like it's the surprise at me liking it is still one of the biggest things for me. But I think it's for all that we said about the progression and that and the different layers and the different power ups and stuff. It's really the combat, the speed of the combat, like there's the. I don't want to get too technical, but it's like each frame, it's framed almost like it's keyframed almost like a beat 'em up, where moves feel really impactful in like the animation speeds. Like when you hit people, there's almost like there's a tiny pause whenever you hit someone. It just makes the impact, even though from the asymmetric perspective and stuff, you don't really get the visual, that close up visual of the impact, so you can't build kind of meaning and kind of grandiose sort of bludgeoning of characters into it through the camera. But yeah, just those little pauses, the little effects when you hit them, like all of that stuff is I don't know if enough people have been speaking about that. Like a lot of people have spoken about the narrative and stuff and how good it is, but yeah, those little things, the animation quality, all of those little things, like from the top down, from the top level stuff all the way through to those tiny details, like it's just slick. Like the presentation is, and obviously it looks incredible. Gen Z is the character artist at Supergiant, and I mean, oh my god, it's like the characters, they all just look amazing. Like they're I want
posters
on.
Of all of them. Like they are. The art is incredible. I think, and that notion of the things like the frames, the hitboxes, those beat 'em up esque elements are for me how I feel myself getting better as a player versus all of the upgrades and stuff like that. It's those moments where I realise that actually I can. I mean, there's the obvious stuff, like being able to dash through an attack or a pillar or whatever it might be, but then there's also the more nuanced and subtle things that I notice in that area where there are certain aspects, particularly of the I think the Titan glove. The mitts, the boxing gloves, effectively, that you get. There's a particular aspect of that draws. It's like a magnetic thing, and it draws enemies. When you do your special, it draws enemies into you, and you can do it whilst you're dashing, and you can kind of slide away from. You can do it and then kind of use the back end of that move to slide away from the group that you've just pulled into you, and you're invincible whilst you're doing that because it's that dash movement. And it's little things, and I wouldn't consider myself a technical Hades player at all. It's just I know that through how it feels, and I haven't studied it and I haven't looked it up on various videos, but I just know that I got better at with that particular weapon, understanding when I'm invincible, when I need to dash, when I can be, because what that weapon in particular, a bit like the swords as well, but the mitts in particular, you really do have to be up close and personal. So it's like understanding that stuff extends your life expectancy quite dramatically, more so than understanding that stuff if you're using the gun or the bow. So getting better as a player is definitely a very rewarding part of it as well, not just all the cool stuff that you unlock.
I mean, I suppose I'm trying to think of things wrong with it, and they just say something bad about it. But I am annoyed, I suppose, that because having it on PC and Switch, I am annoyed at the lack of the cross save option, which is supposedly coming, but it is annoying. So I've played way more on Switch than PC, like I said, but I would prefer to play more on PC. Certainly if I'm going to play more than one run, then I would prefer to play on PC, because I prefer the Xbox controller. The screen's bigger. It does look nicer on PC.
Yeah.
It does.
I mean, the frame rate stays far more consistent as well. If you're playing handheld on Switch, it can get a bit bogged down because there's just so much going on screen at certain points. So even just from a performance standpoint, being able to play on PC and look at it on a big screen would be better. You'd probably be better at the game, I would imagine. Yeah, I mean, I think I may have noticed, I don't know, once in the one bit of vocal delivery, not in terms of it being misspoken, but like the intonation didn't quite match the script at one point in the 70 odd hours that I've played it. So, you know, I mean, it's definitely, I know it's only, what are we in? October, but I think I will certainly be talking about this game at the end of the year in any sort of game of the year list. I think it's high up there for sure.
Well, I mean, if those are the only points that we're pulling out for negatives. I mean, that's probably
this one time in
right.
70 hours he said this thing funny. That was that was about it. Yeah, and it's cross save isn't here yet. Yeah.
It'll be interesting actually to see. I mean, we can talk about this another time. We're pretty much out of time now, but it'll be interesting to see how it performs on people's Game of the Year list, because it's going up against like Last of Us 2 is one of the most obvious ones, obviously. I don't know, Cyberpunk might blow everyone away. I don't know, a lot of people like Doom. It'll be interesting to see how it does against those. I mean, Supergiant, they're not a small studio, but they're not Naughty Dog.
For sure.
So it'll be interesting to see how it performs against those.
Yeah, it will be the very personification of a god killer in that sense. Just to end with a pun.
Is this we ending with a pun every week? So
I think I'm gonna make that a thing.
Plants vs Zombies last week, and now it's God Killer this week.
Yeah, we'll let other people be the judges of how successful that is. But yeah, this is a thing I'm gonna invest some time in.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm speechless after that, to be honest. So I think it's probably a good time to bow out and say our goodbyes. Why don't you come and tell us what you thought about Hades? We're on Twitter at IndieByDesign, and while you're there, you'll also find a link to our Discord server. And if you're quick, we have a competition running that closes on the 16th of October, and you can win yourself a copy of Oddworld Abe's Origins, which is a book we made in conjunction with Oddworld Inhabitants, and that tells a story of all of the Abe and all of the Oddworld games, all the way from Abe's Odyssey and Abe's Exodus on PS1, all the way through to Soulstorm, which is coming out soon. The competition closes on the 16th, so you don't have long, but if you do decide to enter, then good luck. And whatever the case, we'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening.